Right, welcome back. We are COMP1011, that's Advanced OOP with Java in the summer 2022 semester at Georgian College. And it's week 5, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. And in this part, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with what we did on the last part. And if I go back to our IntelliJ, right, we were working with, kind of our new chart view that we kind of put together. Here's our chart view, but there's no chart yet. It's just empty, right? Let's use some configuration inside of our in our scene builder to add the stuff that we need for our chart view. All right, so far we've added things like border panes and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty good. And that's one of the things that we did, for the last things that we did, right? We added a border pane, and inside the border pane, we align stuff. I think that's a good structure for what we want to do here. So I'm going to go into our containers, and I'm going to go down to border pane. And again, I'm just going to drag and drop that border pane in here, right? And what we want to do is we want to right click on the border pane and do fit to parent, which kind of expands it to fit everything here, okay? And what we want to do, with this thing up here is you want to think about a couple of things that we want. Okay, so one is I want some kind of label that talks about that kind of just defines or shows the actual object itself, right? So it's kind of up here at the top, maybe a label that says something like vector 2D, by magnitude, something like that, because we want to show the magnitude up here, vector 2D by magnitude, right? So let's do that. So we'll go into controls and we'll grab a label and we'll drag and drop that label into the top part of the border pane. There it is. And we'll just rename this thing so it says something like vector 2D. If I can actually do this, vector 2D by magnitude. Okay, vector 2D by magnitude. And there it is at the top. Okay. Again, guys, slow me down if I'm going too fast because this is all new stuff. Okay, so the first thing is we just some of the same things we did last time, which is a border pane. Next, notice that here inside of Scene Builder, there's this little chart area here. And there's a bunch of stuff. Notice the pie chart, a scatter chart, and a stacked area chart, and a line chart. We're doing the bar chart, okay? You can do other ones too, but this is the one I want to use. I want to take that bar chart and drag it across, right, into the center area over here of the border pane. Okay, this is what this is. Nice. And, let's save that. We want to define a couple of things here for everything. So the first thing I want to do is define the bar chart itself. So on the left, where you click on bar chart inside of the hierarchy for Scene Builder, on the right-hand side in code, we want to select bar chart for our FX ID. Again, a bunch of ways to do that. I'm just going to use bar chart lowercase b for bar chart like this. And again, notice inside the bar chart, there's these two other things that we want to define, okay? There's the category axis and the number axis. Notice what we said that inside of the things that we care about is those two axes, the number axis and the category axis, right? That's what we want. So here's the category axis. I'm clicking there. And on the right-hand side where there's FX ID, I'm just going to call this the category axis lowercase, category axis. Same thing. And over here under the number axis, I'm just going to use lowercase so just it doesn't clash with the original thing. So number axis. There we go. So those are the things we want. So bar chart, category axis, number axis. Those are the ones we put in there. Save. Okay, save. And once we save it, of course, now that we have this structure starting off, right? We know that what we want to do, we want to put a button to prepare ourselves for scene switching at the bottom part of the chart, right? So at the bottom, right, what I want to do is I want to put a button, okay? Let's do that. So just to prepare the chart itself, I'm going to go into controls, and I'm going to go into the button, and I'm going to drag and drop this button into the bottom part of the chart, like so. Here's the button. And what I want to do with this button is I want it on the right hand side so we can switch this way. And I want to right click on the button here like this, and I want to wrap it in some kind of HBox. Okay. Now you can do an HBox or a vertical box. HBox is another container. Notice it kind of shuffles me off to the left hand side here with the HBox, right? So notice that the button is now inside the HBox because I've wrapped it inside of the HBox. I want to take this button and I want to put it on the right hand side. And what we do is go to the HBox itself and go to layout. And notice that the layout, the center for the HBox, so this is the button, this is the HBox. All right, the center for the HBox is center. There's also center right, right? We can kind of shuffle things around for the HBox. This is the center right, right? So there's the HBox. Here's the button, right? And notice that it says the HBox is showing, kind of center right. So then why does the button stay on the left-hand side? What did we do wrong, right? In terms of the whole thing. We want this thing to be on the right-hand side, right? What else could we do that's different? So properties, notice it says alignment is top left. This is interesting. I want center right. That's what I want. And that's where we do it, not in layout. Layout has center right alignment for the box itself, right? The border pane constraints for the object, right? But actually, where we really want to do it when we click on HBox is through properties, which also has an alignment for the node itself, which is center right. So that's where we want to put it. That's where this appears. So the category axis in Scene Builder, right? So again, this is the number axis. This is the category axis down here, okay? So on the left-hand side, if you open up the bar chart, you can see that the category axis you can click on here, and the number axis you can click on there. Those are the two. The button that we want, this button here, right? We want to have a button, this button here, and we want to say something like change to table view. Let's change the button so it says change to table view. Change to table view, right? That's the button. It's pretty huggy. It kind of hugs the bottom corner of the screen here. And what you can do with this is in the border pane itself. If I click on the border pane, right, notice that there are some, under layout, if I go to layout, right, there's some padding that you can use, right? You can change this padding. You can put it here or you can put it here. I'm going to put in, kind of 10 and then 10. So 10 all the way around for the padding, which kind of makes it so that it kind of pushes in the chart a little bit, gives me a little bit of a border in here for the button. So 10, 10, 10, 10 for the padding, okay? You can do this with CSS as well, but I'm doing it here inside the object. Let's save this, kind of the layout. That's what I want to do. I want to save the layout, and I want to test it now inside of IntelliJ before I do any kind of exporting. So here in IntelliJ, I'm just going to press play, and we should see that same layout. No data, just the layout. Okay, you should see the same layout come into IntelliJ. Okay, cool. I love it, right? It's great. It's a good start. This is where I want my data. Okay, so things to do is I want to export it for the controller. So again, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go Show Sample Controller Skeleton, right? And I want to click onto it, and I want to select all of this. All right, copy it. And once I've done that, go back to IntelliJ, and inside where it says the View Chart View Controller, Vector 2D Chart View Controller, I want you to replace all of this with that, right? So that's what I want you to replace with. And that's what we have so far, right? One thing that's missing is some kind of event handler for the chart view controller, right? So we have the bar chart, and the bar chart is going to have two pieces, right? The bar chart is going to be on the left is going to be a category of numbers. On the right is going to be a category, or the bottom is going to be a category of strings. Bar chart, if you hover over bar chart, this is kind of interesting. Bar chart uses X and Y. Well, X and Y is what we want, right? So on the x-axis, it's going to be strings, right? That's going to be the string name of the actual object itself, our vectors, which is like, the number. It's going to say 0, 1, 0, 2, 10, 20, 30, 40, minus 15, 25, whatever it's going to be, right? That's that's a string representation of the vector. That's what this is going to be. That's the category, right? And the number is going to be of type float. So that's what it's going to be for our bar chart. So that's something we have to configure. We have the category axis and the number axis. We have those two things, right? But you know what? I probably want some kind of, of an array or some kind of an event, an action event for when I want to load the table view. Okay, that's what I want to have. So the way that looks is, let's do it manually here as a change, because we do it the other way around normally. It's fxml, and then what we want to do in here is we want to say private void, and then load table view, right? I'm going to use capital L, load table view, load table view. And inside there, what we want is an action event. We want an action event where we have an event itself, right? And this is basically the event listener or event handler for the button. When I click on the button, I'm going to load the table view. I don't have any code for this yet, but I want to prep for it. Okay, save. Save. And I want to go back to Scene Builder the opposite way, right? I want to go back to Scene Builder and click on this button. And then that button, I'm going to go to code, and where it says on action, I want to select that, load table view. It'll come up, right? So once I've put it in, like I said, once I've put in the load table view here inside of the vector 2D chart view controller, right? This load table view function, it should appear here on the on action, okay? And that's what I want to do. I want to connect our object to the load table view. Okay, and to test this, if I go to view, show sample controller, you can see that that is indeed there already. It's kind of in there. It'll show you this part. Okay, nice. And that's the first piece. This is our user interface so far for the table view or the chart view itself. So let's put that in. So save, and we'll go into here and we'll open up the terminal and we'll say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added UI for ChartView. UI is done. Git push. Okay. Now let's wire it up, because making the load table view is one thing, and there's other things we want to do. One thing we want to also do is inside of our a vector 2D chart view controller, we want to make it so that it implements initializable, which we've done before. That's kind of like in the last one. Remember, when we implement initializable, we need to also include an initialize method, and we can do that automatically by using this little red light bulb here. I can implement methods. It's going to say which one do I want to implement. I want to implement the initialize method, and press OK. And it kind of gives me this initialize method down here, which is where I want it. Okay. Save. So this initialize method, because it's initializable, is where all our work is going to be, right? And I want to also come up with a little private method, you remember we had to have that XY chart thing? I want to include it here, right? Because these are all the properties. These are all the private properties, if you will, that are related to the chart. I want to include inside of this a private, here's something new, XY chart and dot series. That's what it is, XY chart dot series. And the XY chart dot series is going to have two parts, a string part, which is the category, and a float part, which is the number, right? And then I'm going to call this thing whatever I want, right? You can call this whatever you want. And a nice thing to call this thing be something like, magnitude. If I was going to kind of add stuff in there, if I was going to do it here manually, it might be called magnitude. Okay, it might be. So that's what I could do. All right. I'm going to tell you that I probably don't really need it. Okay. I don't need to do this XY chart series here. in fact, but this is kind of what I want to do for my initialization. So let's keep this in mind. I'm not going to do that here. Let's comment it out. I'm not going to do it here, but this is kind of what I want to do here. I want to kind of do an XY chart series, string and float. I want to call it magnitude, and I want to use the initialize method to do this for us, okay? So how do I do this thing, right? How do I do this thing? Well, it'd be really nice if the DB manager was able to do it for me, because remember, I'm going to load it from my database. That's what I want to do. I want to load my database and get the magnitude from my database and inject it into my chart, right? So how it would look is something more like this. I'll say something like, hey, bar chart, I want to get data. The data is the data object, and I want to add all, right? Just like we've done before. And I want to say, hey, DB manager, I want to go through the instance method. I don't have this yet, but I want to do something called get magnitude. So this doesn't exist right now. We're going to be red like this, okay? But this is what I want to do, this, okay? And notice on the left here, this little light bulb pops up and it says, create method get magnitude in DB manager. Isn't this a beautiful thing? Let's try this. Let's see what happens if I do this. So I click this and all of a sudden, bam, DB manager gets created. And not only that, but it gives me everything that I need. It actually tells me everything that I want to do automatically, right? Isn't that beautiful? Right? So let me go back and undo that again. We'll do it together again one more time. Yes, 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 yes. So if I go back to my Vector 2D chart view controller, I have this little thing that's red, right? If I click onto it and I hover over to the left, there's a little light bulb. Let's do this again, right? So I'm going to click onto the light bulb and it tells me, hey, this is how we can fix this problem. One of the ways to fix this problem is to create a method that's missing. By the way, it's going to determine what add all needs. Add all, it must have some kind of series. Look at that. That is what it's looking for. A series that is string float. An XY chart series that is string float, in fact. That's why it determined that if I create a method inside of my DB manager, that it should return a type that is XY chart series. That's just a pair that we're returning, the collection that we need to return from the database. That is correct. Let's kind of do this. All right, interesting. That's awesome. That's one of the first things we want to do. So that in my DB manager, right, if we think about this now, this is what we want to return, right? This, series string float. Okay, nice. How do we configure something like this? Well, this is where we do that thing. We say XY chart and dot series, and then X and Y, and we're going to put in a string float. This is that idea that we had. We're going to call it magnitude. And we're going to say that's going to equal to a new XY chart series object. Okay, so that's the first thing. So this the first step is really creating a series. So this is like step one for this kind of chart. Create a series, right? And this is what this is. This series, which is in this case string and float, because the bottom part of our chart, again, you can configure this any way you want because this is a collection, a generic of a type. And the first part you can put in is the category on the x-axis, which is horizontal. And sorry for the beeping. And this is the on the y-axis, which is the vertical axis up here on the left. That's what it'll appear. That's the float. So all the magnitudes will appear on the left, just like we saw here. We see like a numeric axis here, and down here we're going to see a category axis down here. Right. So this is how the bar chart would work. Right. All right, cool. So this is the series. This is the first thing. We call it magnitude. And then what we want to do is, instead of recreating the wheel, look, up here we have this, read vector table, right? We want to read the vector table, right? Isn't that beautiful? We already have the ability to read the vector table. We're just reading it again down in here. Instead of recreating all this stuff where we have to try and make a connection and all this stuff, it's right here for us. It's already made. There's nothing for us to do again. We still are gonna return a result that includes everything that we need, right? Well, then let's just do it. Let's just say something like that. We'll say, hey, I want to create an array list, right, of vector 2D type, right? It's going to be called vectors, and I'm going to get that from my read vector table. So that's my vectors. Vectors are all going to come from my read vector table, all right? Which is this part, this method that we defined last week. I'm using the method inside of DB Manager instead of making something brand new. Why? If I have everything I need, right? So that's what we did. That's line 2. So step 1, create the series. Step 2, get the data, right? This line right here gets the data from the database. That's how simple it is, right? We already got data. We're already reading data from the database. I'm just using it again right here. And we're just changing the way the data is displayed into a chart instead of a table. That's the only difference, okay? And then what's step 3? Step 3 is I want to loop over each, actually, let's rephrase this. For each vector in the table, in the data, right? Loop. That's what we want to say, right? And add it to the series, right? That's what we want to do, which is this part right here, the magnitude. Okay. So how does this look? Is we're going to make a for each loop, and I'm going to use the var keyword. Var keyword is a way of using automatic or implicit typing, where the system determines what the data type is instead of me telling it what the data type is. It's different than var in JavaScript. Okay, like I said before, it's more like an auto keyword in C++ or the var keyword in C#. It's like that. Once we define the data type, you can't change it. It doesn't matter. It's not flexible like it is in JavaScript. It's not like a loosely typed thing. It's still a strict type. We're going to call this, for every vector, this is how you're going to read this, for every vector in the vectors array. Remember that the vectors array, right? The vectors array comes from the database. The database gives us the vectors array. So for every vector in the vectors array, I'm going to loop, and I'm going to say that the magnitude for the vector, this magnitude thing, magnitude, right? I want to get data, and I want to add, right? This is interesting. I want to add a new XY chart data, right? Which is going to pass in the vector toString, right? Remember, the data has 2 parts, right? In this case, because my new data, I can define whatever data I want to send in. I need it in the format of string float, right? That's the data that I want to send in, and I want to pass this into my series, okay? Now I can do it in 1 line. Let's not do it in 1 line. Let's just do it in 2 lines. So we'll say the data that we want, which is the XY chart data. Let's use a var for this because we don't know what type this is going to be, right? So this is kind of the chart data. We'll call this chart data. Okay, so the chart data is, what is it? An XY chart data. That's what it is. Dot data. And we're going to pass in here, right? We're going to use the new keyword, a new XY chart data. We're going to pass in the vector that we're looping into. So here's the vector for every vector in vectors. For this vector, for the vector that we're looping into, I want to do a vector.toString. Remember what vector.toString does is it converts our vector from x and y coordinates to open bracket x comma y. That's what it does. It makes it a very nice string method. And then followed by the vector.getMagnitude. Isn't that beautiful? So this creates the chart data that I need. And if I hover over chart data, what is this thing? It tells me that chart data is never used, but it's of type xychart.data. Huh. So I don't have to actually declare the type here, right? var does it all for me. And I can take this chart data and just put it in here. and it satisfies the requirement. So I'm saying, hey, the chart data that I need is, well, this piece, right? That's what I have. That's what I'm getting from this. The vector toString for the string part, and the vector magnitude for the float part. And I'm taking those two pieces of data and I'm saving them in this variable called chart data. And that chart data, and maybe what you want to call this is bar chart data, like almost like the bar itself. This is the one bar that I'm getting, and I'm inserting it into the magnitude. Really, this shouldn't be called magnitude. It should be called magnitudes, because it's more than one, right? It's more than one magnitude. We have a series of magnitude, or the magnitude series, whatever you like, right? So that's what you're doing. So step one, we make a series, magnitudes, and then step two, we read the data from the database. Step three, we loop over all that data and we separate out. We create the chart data that we need from each of the vectors, and we inject that chart data into the magnitudes bar chart, right? Again, if you really want to think about what this is, if you want to be really more specific, right, you can keep going and change this. Change this XY chart series to say magnitudes chart data, right? But we don't have to do that. And of course, what I want to do at the end is after I configure everything, I'm going to return magnitudes. Okay. And why can I return magnitudes? Because magnitudes is of the type we need to return, right? This is the type that we're returning right here. And that's the type we're doing right here, if that makes sense. All right, so this is my method. And this method, if you think of what it does, let's just do a little bit of commenting here. So this method returns the chart data. We'll call the bar chart data, all right, from the database. That's what it does. Okay. Nice. All right, let's test it. And if I go back to my calculate vector, my vector 2D chart view controller, this one, now it computes. Now it computes, right? So that is the vector 2D chart view controller, vector 2D chart view controller, right? All right, let's run this thing. Let's see if we get the data like we're expecting. So if I run it, if we did everything correctly, then we should have our data in the chart. And this is what you should see. It's nice and simple. Questions so far? So notice on the bottom what it shows, right? The bottom shows a couple things. Each of these labels are the labels of our vectors, and they've been put in here like this. By the way, you can expand this, and when you expand it, it'll change, it'll modify everything on the fly for you. If I make it like maximize, it'll maximize the chart and expand it to the way it's going to be as well. This is the default functionality, if you will, okay? But this is what you're going to see here. This is the chart data. You can also make it smaller, and when you make it smaller, it'll try and fit in the chart data according to the size of the table. Okay? Let's try that again. So if I was to run it again, you can see that indeed we're going to get that chart data. Okay? What are your thoughts, guys? Did you get this too? If you did, thumbs up. If you didn't, let me know, because we're going to continue from here. Okay, some people got it. Giovanni, you got it. All right. Thumbs up from Daniel. That's good. Hopefully you guys are getting it. All right, so this is great. So this is the data that we want here. And this is fantastic. Let's talk about some options. Well, let's put this up on GitHub. So again, I'm going to go to terminal, and I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say, and what we really did was into the DB manager, we modified DB manager to return magnitude data, chart data. Guess what we did? Awesome. And if we go back to that DB manager for a second, we could also see it in a different way. And I want to talk about this just really briefly. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to talk about what we could do instead. All right. So what if instead of me reading my array of data, right, as an example, right, instead of looping over everything the way we've done over here, is there another way to add the data as an alternate solution, right? You could add the data one at a time. So instead of, let's just like comment this out for now, okay? I just want to show you something. And again, I think, this is kind of a good exercise to do as well. So what if I wanted to add some mock data? So here's what mock data might look like. Call this mock data. Mock data might be in this form of this. Hey, magnitudes, I want to get data and I want to add, remember that whole add thing? Magnitudes get data add, that's right here. I can add in one line a new XY chart dot data, and I want to add in right here, inline, what I want, something like this, right, 0, 0. It's going to look exactly how I want it. This is a way of testing. And then I can say, well, that's 0, 0, right? So that's kind of the value for the y-axis, right? And that's a way of testing if the data works. If it's not working from the database, you can test to see, like if you're doing assignment 1, you can actually put the data in here and use some mock data, to test it out with. So assignment 1, you can get this data to go with the chart, so that way you can see what this looks like. I'm just going to put some data in here, just so that you can see kind of how it looks. It's not accurate, but we don't care about accuracy. We care about how it looks, right? And if I was to run this thing just by putting in some mock data, then we should get something that looks like this, right? So some kind of very simple chart so we can see that it maps properly and all that kind of stuff. So that's how you can use mock data right there. Okay, mock data. We don't want to. I'm going to just show you mock data. This is a mock data example. Oops. That's what we're doing here. So let's comment that out, right? And let's comment this back in. So let's put this back into play here. And I want to do this, I wanted to show you what this might look like if you were going to do mock data instead of looping over everything, which is what we're doing here. We're looping over everything here. This is what mock data would look like if you weren't going to loop, your mock data example might look like this, or individual data if you want to check things out. Okay. So we're just exploring a little bit. The other thing is that we have a legend when we run this thing. So if I run this thing now, we're going to get data from our database, a couple of things to explore. Notice that there's this little legend thing right here at the bottom. This little legend here is the color of our chart, and I could have multiple data points or data series in here. This is just one series. One thing we can do is we can add an additional series on top of this one at a time. So I can add a first series, then I can add a second series and a third series. And sometimes what we want to do is maybe if we had data coming in from different years, which is very common, then the legend would be the data from 1 year or another year, right? So what we can do here is we can change that. We can say that magnitudes, because this is the series, we're modifying the series. We can say magnitudes dot, and notice that there's a bunch of things we can do. We can get chart, we can chart property, we can do the name property, the node property. There's a lot of things that you can also do. One thing we can do is we can set the name, which is kind of the name of the legend if you really want to, the legend of the data, right? So the legend itself, we can set the name to something like, 2022, which is not a bad thing to do, right? Oops, undo. And if I was to run this now, you can see that our chart is going to show 2022 down there. So that's kind of a reference to when the data came from, right? So that's something we can do. Okay, so that's something we can configure in our get magnitude. But inside of the vector 2D chart view controller, this part right here, there's more that we can do here inside of our initialize function, right? The chart view controller is interesting because we can do other things. Like one thing we didn't do is we didn't set up the number axis. So we can say, hey, number axis, I want to set the label for the number axis to something like magnitude. There's the label for magnitude, right? So if I save this, then if I press play, you're going to see that on the left-hand side, the number axis is going to have magnitude there now. Okay, there's so it describes what the data is, magnitude, right? And we can also do the same thing for the category axis. We can say category axis set label, and that would be something like our vector 2D. That's what that is, right? So save, and then if I press play, you can see that that is going to come up, right? There's vector 2D by magnitude, right? So that's what it is. Vector 2D by magnitude is the chart, right? And furthermore, further than this, right, what you want to do is I could make the bar chart hide the legend. So we can say something. If I don't want to see the legend, I can say bar chart, hey bar chart. And notice there's a lot of things here that you can do. Get bar gap property, and a bunch of other stuff that you can do that you can set up here. But what I want to do is I want to set the legend visibility, right, to false. I don't want to see the legend, let's just say, right? And if I did this and press play again, you can see that I can configure my bar chart so that the legend doesn't appear and we have a much cleaner looking chart. Okay, so that's kind of things that we can do. Let's put that up on GitHub. So we'll say git add dot git commit -m. We'll say configured bar chart git push. One thing we can also do is I can add a data series to this thing automatically by me doing the same thing. I can add a bunch of vector 2Ds as a second series, right? I can add a second series of data. And one thing to note is when you go inside of the bar chart itself, if I click on bar chart, category axis, and number axis, and if I go to properties, notice that there's an animated property that's default. Animated means that if I was to add additional data series in here, then it would animate when I brought it in. Okay, so to test this, let's make another button. Here's a button. And I'm going to put this button on the right side. Let's insert it on the right side for now, right? This button. And we'll just say, add series. That's the button. Add series. Wow. Oh my God, it kind of took all that stuff. I have to always remember to escape. Add series, right? So when I click the add series button, we want to have the add series thing happen. Inside of my code on action, we're going to add a new action called add series. Okay, let's do that. So let's save this, save, and go back to my my code here. And just underneath the load table view, I'll have another fxml area where we'll say that this is a private void. We'll call this add series, right? And what it will do is add a series. This is just example. We don't really need this, but I want to show you if I wanted to see what this looks like. There's lots of stuff you can do here. So this is just an example. You don't need this for your ICE. But if I was to click add series, I want to add more data. And what we can do is we can use some randomization. Let's create some mock data with random numbers, right? And for that, you can use something called a secure random, which we'll call a random number generator, right? RNG, right? And we can say that that is a new secure random, right? So it kind of creates a pseudo random number generator. And we can say that the xychart.series, there it is. We want to say that that is of type string and float, just like we did before, which we'll call magnitudes, just like we did. And this is more magnitudes. We can say that that is a new XY chart series, right? So just like we've done in the past. And what we want to say is, let's set up the magnitudes.name to, let's say, I don't know, something like 2021. So that was the previous data that we had that we want to kind of see. And we can create some mock data. Let's say call mock1 is equal to new vector 2D where we want to pass in the random number generator next float, right? Where the next float starts off, I don't know, minus 50, that's a range, .0f, and goes to about 50. That's the float range. So random floats, numbers, floating point numbers. And I want to take this data, and I want to do it for both the x, this is the x-axis, and the y-axis. This is random number generation. Let's just show you this whole thing so you can see it. There's some random stuff. And let's do that a couple of times. So we'll have like 3 new pieces of data. All right, so I don't know, right. And I can do 2 and 3, so a few pieces of data. We just by getting random numbers, and we'll use magnitude. We'll add it in. We'll say, hey, magnitudes, I want to get data. Remember we did this before. Add all, right? And what we want to do is we want to do new XY chart data, and we want to add in the Mach1 dot and toString. Let's do toString. And we'll also do a Mach1 dot get magnitude, right? Because that's something that we've done before, right? And we'll kind of copy paste that data a couple times. So copy, copy paste, and it'll be, you know, Mach2, Mach3 for these 2 things. There's the new piece of data, right? And then what we'll do is we'll say bar chart, hey bar chart, let get data dot add, and we'll add in the magnitudes, the new magnitudes thing we just added in. So that will be a way of adding in this new series. This is a new series of data. It's just mocked up. Imagine we're getting something from another database or some other table that we want to combine with the original table, right? And what it'll do is it'll actually, if there's a data point that's exactly the same as the other one, it'll put it together. If not, it'll add new data points. Okay, let's see how this works. So add series, we have to connect that to our UI. So again, I'm going to go to add series, the add series button, and I'm going to select the add series action. There's the action I want to use, save. And now when I run this thing, we should have that button come up. And there's the button. And if I click add series, then it animates in. There it is. And if I click it again, it animates in again and again. And it's kind of weird, isn't it? And the reason why it's kind of weird is because there's like massive numbers, really, really big. And what if I had like a really complex number for this kind of stuff as well? Well, to me, although we did it for a joke, just to show you the data animating in. By the way, if you don't want it animating in, right, which it kind of looks okay, but it can also mess up the way your data looks, right, as an example. If you don't want to animate it in, like I said, the other way to do it is go into here and change the options. So if you go to properties and if you uncheck animated, and if you go to category access and uncheck those 2, so the whole thing is not animated anymore, right? So I'm just going to save that. I've just unchecked animated from all those 3 properties: bar chart, category access, and number access, right? And if I go back and run it again, let's run it one more time. And then if I add the data in there, the data series, then you see it just pops in, right? So then it pops in, right? So that might be something that you want instead, right? A little bit more reasonable in terms of the way it's added in, but this is a problem, guys. This right here is huge. I don't like this at all, right? We need another method. This is actually, even though we played around, we found out that there's something that's missing. And one thing that's missing from this data is a way of making these numbers smaller, maybe to like 1 decimal place. So let's add another toString method in our vector2D to supplement this. So in our vector2D, we can go in here, and we don't want to see a toString method. Here's our toString method. Our toString method is down here, and the toString method, what it does is it returns all this. And so we kind of want to do almost the exact same thing with our vector2D with a little bit more care. Let's make a new method. This is part of your ICE, right? And it is a public string. And we're going to call this method a 2-1 decimal string. 2-1 decimal string method, okay? Oop. Okay, and the 2-1 decimal string method is going to have 2 things: a var x, which is going to be a string dot format, we're going to format the string, where we can say, remember this is from last day, where I want 0.1f, that's the format that I want to use, and then I want to use getX, right? And I'm going to say, let's just copy paste this. By the way, it tells you it's a string type. I could just put string in there instead of var, but it's just quick. I don't have to think about the type. I'm just going to type away, and then this will be y. So here I'm string formatting x and y, and then I can take this exact thing here, this return statement that I have here, this part, and I can just put this in here, and instead of x and y, I can just pop in, or get x and y, I can just pop in x and y. And we have another way of kind of, outputting to a decimal string instead of a regular string. So a decimal string, or one decimal string, means like there's only going to be one decimal place afterwards. Again, you can think about other ways of doing things. Precision, you can change the precision maybe of the string itself before, maybe a two-string method that has a precision. 1, 2, that takes some kind of data in here as opposed to this. So you can specify the number. Here I just want to show you that you can do all kinds of stuff in your model class, right? So let's say 2 one decimal string. Okay, cool. So let's go back to and zip over to our ChartView controller. And in our mock data this time, instead of using our two-string method here, let's use 2 one decimal string. So we'll say 2 one decimal string, and we'll take that and replace the data for our mock data to 2 one decimal string. And if I was to do that and try it out, now we're going to see when we actually add more data. So here it's okay, but if I click add series, now it's all in only 1 decimal, right? So it's not going to be too crazy in terms of the way it's going to be displayed. So it's not bad. It's a nice little utility method we added in. Let's add that into GitHub. So we'll say terminal, we'll say git add dot, git commit -m. We'll say added the 2 one decimal string utility method to vector2d. A bit long in terms of our comments, but it's okay, right? Again, it's part of your ICE that I wanted you guys to do, right? Well, now that we have this 2 one decimal string, maybe you want to format all of them like this. And we know that inside of where we did this real data, where the real data came from, was inside of our DB manager. And our DB manager, when we put the data together inside of our loop, we did 2 string. Let's just use 2 one decimal string here in this case, right? And what this does is it changes everything to 1 decimal string, no matter what kind of data we have, right, in our vector, right? So if our vector 2D happens to have more than 1 decimal place, it's only going to show 1 decimal place, going to round up for us, right? So again, if I was to run this, it's not going to make any difference in our data in this case because our data is already 1 decimal place, right? But it actually rounds up the data, right? So that the way it shows here in the bottom makes sense. And then so it kind of rounds off, and you can see this the series here. So this is the add series button. We're using it just as to test with, but we really don't need it in our design. And so what we can do is we can just remove it. So let's get rid of it. That was just a test, just to see what if we were to add. And I wanted to show you what it looks like to animate stuff in, new series in. And I also wanted to show you how to add data in. And you can see that this chart automatically adds multiple series in. And notice it comes in with different colors, and that would be also a different legend down here as well. So save, please. And that is our example of a chart. So we've done the chart part. Now the last part, which is what we need, is some kind of scene switching that we want to do. To prepare for this, I want to also add this change to button to the other view. So let's open that up. So file, and I want to open, and I want to target the other one, the table view. Here's the table view. So in the table view, we had this data, the table data, but I want to also have that button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, right? So here's our border pane, and on the bottom right, or in the bottom, I want that other button. Let's put that in there now. So again, under controls, I want to go to button and insert to the bottom. There it is. And then just like we did before, I want to right click and I want to wrap in a H box, which is going to push this button to the left. And this button here will be something like, just like we had in the other view. So notice whenever you do this, you have two of these happening. This is change to table view, right? And I want the table view to have a button, right? And this button that's going to be in the bottom, right, should be something like, view chart data or something like that, right? So let's change the property first of the button. The button's going to say something like view chart data, Here's the view chart data button. And again, just like I did last time with the HBox, I want to go to the properties and change to the center right, So you can see that that is where it goes of the right side of the button. So now we have a button, right? This button here, save. And this button here has to be added into the, the code as well. So again, one thing is we've saved the fxml document, but we need the controller to have access to this button as well. And we need to wire it up with some kind of event. So just like we did before, I'm going to go back into IntelliJ. And inside of IntelliJ, inside the other controller, the table view controller, we want the same kind of idea that we have here. Oops. Table view controller. So here's the chart view controller. And in the chart view controller, we had this little thing that says load table view. We're going to also have another button that says load chart view. All right, so we're going to copy this piece. And I want to go to the table view controller. And before the initialize method or anywhere else you want to put it, I want to kind of put this in. And instead of it being load table view, I want to call this load chart view. Okay, load chart view. And load chart view should be available now inside of the scene builder. So scene builder, if I click on the button on the right-hand side, and if I go to code, and then if I go to the on action, I should be able to pull down load chart view. And I'm going to save, which allows me to load the chart view when I'm here, because I don't want to go to the table view and somehow be stuck. I don't want that. I want to be able to go back and forth between the table view and the chart view. Right? Nice. And I'm going to close that off. We only really care about this one right now because we're going to wire that up, but we're pretty much done that stuff. So we have both the buttons. We have the button both in the chart view. Here's the button for the chart view, and we have the button for the table view. The table view and the chart view. They're both just differently named buttons. We need a method, some kind of thing that allows us to transport between views, right? And it's a perfect place to put a brand new singleton called the scene manager. Let's do that. So right click, make a new class. We're going to call this one the scene manager. Okay, it's a scene manager singleton class. So that's what this is. So we'll call this the singleton. Right, that's what it is. And remember the singleton? We have a pattern for the singleton already, right? The pattern for the singleton is sitting inside of DB manager. DB manager has a pattern for the singleton. It's all up here. Look, here's this singleton section. Let's grab this whole part, this whole singleton section. Let's copy the whole singleton section from the DB manager, right? And paste it inside the scene manager. So scene manager, paste. We just need to change the names to protect the innocent. So we're going to take this scene manager thing, copy, and just change everything that says DB manager to scene manager. And ta-da, we have a scene manager singleton instantly, right? And just for you guys who are watching, again, you can always take a screenshot if you're watching, whatever. So now that we have the singleton, the scene manager needs a special method, and it's going to be a special method that's going to be under here. It's going to be a public void method that we're going to call change scene. Change scene. And the change scene, we're going to have a couple things that it needs. It needs an action event that we're going to use to identify which scene or what's the stage. When I have an action event, the event itself is going to tell us what the stage is, the window. That's what we're going to use for that. I'm also going to use a string, which is the fxml file name. Okay, as well as we know those things for sure. Okay, that we need. And what this thing will do, this little method, we'll say this method will change, the new scene passed into it as an argument. Okay, so that's what we argument. All right, so that's what it will do. Okay, that's what this method looks like. So it's called change scene. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to say something like, hey, fxml loader, right? Just like we did in the main, right? Main, remember, has an example of fxml loader loading up the fxml object, right? This is what it did. It's almost like I can, well, let's just do it. Let's just like steal this part right here. We'll steal this whole thing from main and we'll put it into scene manager. So boom, fxml loader is equal to new fxml loader, main class get resource, and instead of using ChartView, it's going to be whatever the fxml file name is going to be. So that's what's going to go in here. So fxml file name, right? That's the resource. And then what we want to say is, just like in main, right? What we want to do is we wanted to set up the scene. So where it says load, as an example, 600 by 400, we're going to grab the second line here that we already have here. And we want to put that in the scene manager. So it's the second line coming right from main. But we don't care about 600 and 400. We can just kind of put in something that looks like this. Okay. So this is the next line that we want. And it kind of gives us this little issue. It says unhandled exception, Java IO exception. And what we can do to fix this, if we click on it, is say something like, we want to add exception to the method signature, which adds this throw IO exception, which fixes the issue. That makes sense for us, right? So just in case there's a problem with the scene, it'll throw an exception. That's what I was going to say. Now, this is the tricky part. We want to kind of derive, and this is something that, or as in my notes, derive the stage, which is the window, right, from the action event, which is the button press, right? That's what it is, okay? So we're going to say stage, right? Let's Alt-Enter for that. Stage, and we're going to say that that is equal to we're just going to cast it as a stage. And we want to cast this as a node. This is kind of a bit of code here. I don't expect you guys to remember this, but you can definitely use it, where we say it's going to be, did I cast the wrong node? I want the Java effects scene node. That's the one I want. Oh, wait, where is it? Did I put the wrong node in here? Node. We did the wrong node. We did the wrong node for sure. Scene node. That's kind of what I want in here, but we want to put node as a Java effects node. Let's undo those changes. Yes, so stage is equal to it's almost like I want to do the event get source, and I want to do the get scene, right? But I can't do scene because the event source, right, as an example, needs to be cast as a stage, right? That's why it has to be this way. So we're going to say, well, guess what? The event is a node, right? And when we kind of say, what kind of node is it? If I press Alt-Enter, it says, what kind of node do you want? I want a Java effects scene node. That's what I want, okay? And the node itself, I want to surround the node itself in another set of parens. And I want to cast that node as a stage. So that's the stage. And we're going to say that the stage, right, that we're casting, we're going to get scene and then get window. That should fix it. And that weird line of code, I'm going to copy paste this thing and put it into the chat. That weird line of code is a funky way of getting access to the window from the button press. Okay, whatever the button is we're getting, that's the way of passing the window into this scene itself. Well, there's other ways to do it too, but that's just one way. We can say that the stage, then we can set scene to the scene that we've just defined. This is the scene, right? The new scene that we're kind of setting up. And then of course we want to stage.show. And this stage.show is going to set up the new scene. So this is the little piece of code that allows us to scene switch. It's the change scene. We're going to use the same change scene code throughout the time that we're switching scenes together. There might be some modifications, but this is the first version of it anyway. Let's add that into GitHub. So again, terminal, I'm going to say something like git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say we created actually a scene manager Singleton with change scene method, git push. We kind of did it in one. We haven't tested this thing out to see if it works though, and we need to do that. We'll do that first in the ChartView controller. The ChartView controller is going to use the scene manager Singleton, okay, the ChartView controller. And the way this is going to work is it's pretty simple. It's going to say, hey, scene manager, we want to go through the instance method to hit the change scene. And guess what we want to see? We want to change. We want to take that event. We're going to derive the window from that event itself. And what we're going to do with that event is we're going to load up this is the fxml file, the vector2d-tableview.fxml, because that is the one we're going to go to, this one right here, the vector2d tableview fxml. Now, the reason why this is getting us an issue is because, well, we know it's throwing an exception, so therefore it's going to also add exception to the method signature, which is going to be right here. Okay, and that's going to allow us to move from our chart view to our table view by using the scene manager change scene method that we just defined. Okay, save, and let's run it. And if everything goes well, then it should work just perfectly. So if I click change it, then bam, it's up, open. This doesn't do anything yet, this thing here. Notice we also have immediately this little scroll bar, and it was automatically, we didn't add this in, we didn't configure this scroll bar, it just added it in because we have more data that we can fit inside of our view. Let's X out of this, and then let's fix up the other one, right? So again, just like we did in the chart view, we can change the table view to look identical. In fact, let's just copy this thing, and we'll go into the table view and pop that in, and we'll also do the same thing with that exception. So we'll add the exception here to the method. It throws an IO exception, but instead of loading vector2d table view, we'll load vector2d chart view, so we can always march back to the chart as well from the table. Let's run this thing now, and we should have the completed form. So again, here is our chart view, which is something that I asked you guys to start with in your assignment 1 and 2. And then if you click on change to table view, then bam, you've got this. And if I want to go back, I can go back here. The only change that I would make is the way this looks. I think it needs a little bit of a layout padding. Let's add that layout padding and we're done for the day. All right, so again, going back to here, you know, I want to go open up that thing we closed. We shouldn't have closed it. Or open. We're going to go open up the table view. This is the table view. You can see that we've got no padding. Let's add padding to the border pane, just like we've done before. I'm going to go to layout. And in layout, let's add a padding of about 10 to each of these things. So to each of the sides. So this is like top, right, bottom, left. It's using the box model. And we can do is we can add everything in there so it gives us a little bit of space all the way around. Save. Save. And if we try it again now, and if we go back to IntelliJ and we click play, we should have that nice padding. When we click from change to table view, we now have this nice little table view in here, and we can have a little scroll bar. Notice the table view is selected. That may not be the behavior you want, but the great thing about this is you could sort by vector ID. You could sort by X coordinate. You could sort by Y coordinate. You could sort by magnitude. which is interesting. It's automatic. It's nothing that I had to do, right? Or do for you. Makes sense? So very good. And we've got most of everything you need for assignment 2. Let's put this up on GitHub. So again, terminal, I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added scene switching functionality to application. Git push. Questions for this kind of stuff? What are your thoughts, guys? Is it crazy what we did? Is it too much? I know it was fast, but the great thing is you have the video. So worst case scenario, you can always go back and review, but it gives you pretty much everything that you would need in order for you to do the scene switching scenario for our app. So any questions you guys have before we go for the day? Thank you, Daniel. Again, what I want to do is talk about the process that we used. Okay, the process that we used was out of necessity. Now we've been going and kind of plugging along and programming as we go. One thing before we leave is a couple things to think about, right? We have a scene manager, we have a DB manager, right? We have a utility class and a main class and a vector 2D model. Wouldn't it be nice if we reorganized or restructured our application with more folders, and that allows us to split this off? We can split off our view, right, which is these controllers, right, our view controllers, and we can split off our model, which is our vector 2D in this case, and our managers, which are singletons, and so is utility. Utility is kind of a manager in itself too, right? It's a singleton. We can make a singletons folder and whatever. And then when it comes to organization, you have things that are here. Same thing with this part. We can make our icon go into an image folder. We can make a CSS folder for our app.css and so on. We can add those things in there. And so that way all of our FXML documents are inside one folder, and then it's organized differently. So we're not going to do it today, but we're going to hit it next class. Maybe we'll reorganize our structure of our application so it's a little bit more organized than this. All right, any questions before we go? Dia says, how to change the x-axis label every time when we click the button to select the country, container, or region. Okay, there's a good question. So, okay, I want you to think of this now. What am I really asking you to do when we switch data? What am I really asking you to do? Am I asking you to use one chart? Do you only have to use one chart? Could you use more than one chart? That's the good question. That's the good question. And the reason for this is because if you designed another chart, every chart for a different thing, instead of redoing your layout, right, and changing the layout on the fly, which you could, right? That means that you're listening for the button to change. And when the button changes, you change the stuff that you use, like the radio button, right? But if you think about what that radio button is, right, it's almost like a trick. Remember, it's a lot of times our user interfaces could be, it's kind of smoke and mirrors. You know what I'm saying? What we show to the user and what's happening on the back end would be totally different. So one approach, I'm not telling you this is the best approach, but I want you guys to think about this though, because it's part of your requirements for assignment 2. One approach might be multiple charts, right? Multiple charts that have, yes, Dia, another bar chart with different data, right? It could be, right? The other thing to do, that's the easy approach. That means multiple charts in one. The other approach would be if you click on a radio button, you listen for the event, the change event, and once you change that event, then you swap out all the data in different ways. But I feel that is a lot more challenging than making a brand new chart. And the reason for that is because, remember, we have to pull the database again. We may have to reorganize the data, change the columns. That might have to change as well. And a bunch of other stuff that can happen as well, depending on how you pull in the data. Because you're going to almost like do another SQL query, because you're going to have data by country, data by region, data by, and so on. And that's, almost requires different charts, in my opinion. What are your thoughts, guys? Any other way that you thought that you can think of? to make it better. I don't see it in any other way better than that, to be honest. Easier than that. Okay, that's the answer to that. All right, so that's it for me, guys. Okay, on the horizon, things to note before we go, right? Remember that each PowerPoint has a little thing that tells you what to do for ICE 5. It should say ICE 5 here. My God. And, but in this case, I did happen to do the lab reports for ICE 4 and ICE 5. Please get those things done as soon as possible. Get them done. If you're already following along with me, it's a one and done, and then I'll have everything else for assignment 1 and assignment 2 for you as soon as possible so that you guys have everything you need for next week. Next week, remember, is the last teaching week before the midterm test. Remember that the midterm test happens on week 7. Week 7, there is no lecture on the Thursday evening. Instead, we're going to have Q&A. I will give you the details about the test during the first day, Monday of the week. You'll have the details for the remainder of the week, and you'll have the entire week to get the midterm test done with your video and your report and all that stuff ready for you to go. And then it'll be due at the end of the week. Okay, and then we have a week off, and we're back to the second half of semester when we do APIs. Okay, questions before we go? Right, that's it for me. If there's no questions, I'll stop recording here, and I'll take any other questions or concerns, problems that you might have physically here in class. Thank you. Okay, any